Happy Tuesday. Going to have a short week this week since yesterday was Labor Day. I hope you had a relaxing weekend and off to a good start with this week. Last week we were in court, but most of the stuff that I've looked at that came out of last week were motions. They're very important, obviously, but for the most part, motions still mean that the case is still going on, and I never want to do anything in any of these videos that would deprive a person of a right to a fair trial. I really try to stay away from any pretrial things. Maybe we'll talk about bonds sometimes, but you know, whatever the motions are there, it's really just to set up where we're going to be in the coming weeks of trial. So next week we start. We're not in court this week, it's a short week, but next week we start, and I think first, second, and third is a murder. First, second, and third. So one of those will catch and usually take the whole week. Those cases at least take 3 or 4 days to go through. And so we won't get through all 3 of those murders, but the other 2 are prepared, and we'll get them at a upcoming term. Believe it or not, we're about to run out of court time. We're in September already, and before you know it, it'll be Thanksgiving and then Christmas, and it's kind of whacked up, the court schedule. But we used to get to set the schedule. We don't get to do that anymore. Anyway, we will, not have any trials this week, but we will be catching one next week. So I've seen it come across our comments a good bit, and I have seen this being played out in the news a lot. I'm going to hit you up on the topic today of judicial reform. The legislature is not in session this time. It will come back, I think, in January, and they are usually there until maybe May. Keep going back, but it's a shortened schedule. One of the topics that will be hot and that ended last year hot was judicial reform. What's going on is South Carolina is one of 2 states, 50 states in the Union, 48 of them have found a better way. South Carolina picks, and one other state picks its judges through the judiciary, through a committee called JMSC, and those guys, if candidates want to run for a certain office, that JMSC will say these 2 are qualified, these 2 are not qualified, and then the entire Senate and House can vote on which judge they want to pick, who is out there. Now, obviously, by one of the things that make people that give you a bad result is if you get to pick who runs in the race and you're really cheering for Usain Bolt. You may say, Usain Bolt, you made it. This Johnson guy that came in second, you didn't make it. But Jimmy Richardson, you made it. So you get to set up a race between this really fast Olympic sprinter and a really fat prosecutor. And you've already set the win, right? I mean, it's that part's easy. That's what's happening now. Also, the people on the committee, and hats off to Jeff Johnson, our local delegate. He was on that committee, and he said, look, I don't want anything to do with this. I want off of this committee. But it's still run by lawyers, defense attorneys, who get to pick basically who they're going to be going in front of. And, obviously, some of them, if there's a lawyer from Richland County, he's going to be mostly practicing in Richland County and Kershaw. If there was a lawyer legislator from Horry or Georgetown, they would be very interested in the judge that they pick here. I'm going to tell you, in all honesty, the lawyers that we have here that are on the judiciary in the Senate and the House really don't do a lot of criminal work. I do not believe for a second that they're trying to affect the judges pick so that they can have, most of them don't do it. Luke Rankin does not do criminal work, so you know, it really doesn't matter to him from that standpoint. Greg Hembry doesn't do a lot of criminal work. Stephen Goldfinch doesn't do very much criminal work. I think Carl Anderson is a lawyer legislator. He doesn't do a lot of it. So our local ones, you know, I'm not talking to any of you guys, but across the area, that is what's happening. There's also a rule that's cut in there that if you're a lawyer legislator, you don't have to show up to court when you're in legislation. So then you also get to go in front of the same judge that you've picked and ask him, saying you're going to take a vacation or whatever because you just got out of the Senate. I think the oldest case pending in the state right now is 7 years old, and that's a lawyer legislator on the other side of it. So there is all sort of inherent problems that are cooked into it. And it doesn't matter what the judge thinks, it doesn't matter what the prosecutor thinks. Those are the rules set by the legislation that picks the judges that go in front of the judges. So there's a lot of problems. There are some alternatives that have been floated out there. I don't think that any of them are going to be suitable because you're asking people that are in control of a lot of power to give up that power and let somebody else do it. But what we do on the federal level is if whoever won the election, the executive branch, the president gets to pick with the advice and consent of the Senate and the House. They get to pick the next Supreme Court justice, the next federal judges. That whole system is done, picked by the executive. So we could go to our governor and let him have a couple of seats on the JMSC and figure out if that would be a more fair system. The governor don't care who, he's not going to be practicing law. Another part of that is if you as a state want to elect a more conservative governor, then you may be more into law and order, and that may be part of your decision making. One thing that's been bandied around, but most people don't like it, is judicial elections. The part that is really good about judicial elections is it brings accountability. You will not sit there and do nothing. You will not be a knot on a log as a judge if you've got to be elected, because that'll be used against you. Jimmy is accountable to you. Jimmy is accountable to everybody that calls Horry and Georgetown County home. And the mistakes, I try to be open and honest and the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And that may come back to kick me at some point. But I think that, you need to know the whole story. So that's just what I do. But I am accountable because I'm elected. The sheriff's elected. The clerk of court's elected. I'm not sitting here saying that that would be the best way, but some states, I think 22 states, do have judicial elections. And that way it can be almost like Burger King. If you're an area that wants very liberal judges that may be light on sentencing, you can have that. You can elect that. If you are an area that wants to have more conservative judges that may be harsher on sentencing, you can have that. I think that probably if there is any movement at all on judicial reform, it will come through the JMSC because they're not going to give up a lot of their power. Have a great week, and if you got any questions, hit us up in the comments or the emails.